We are 20 minutes before the hour, depending on your time zone. I'm Casey Green. We're here at the ASU GSV Innovation Conference, and I'm talking with Natasha Cochran, who is the Chief Strategy Officer for Social Sentinel. We're going to have a conversation about school and campus security, which is those issues have changed dramatically over the last decade. Again, just as a reminder, the platform we're using is Shindig. It's there's capacity here, not just for text-based questions, but for those of you who have a webcam and audio, we can possibly even bring you in to ask that question live, interactively with us, and want to encourage you to do that. Natasha, nice to see you again. Thank you for joining us. In the interest of full disclosure, I should add that Social Sentinel is a corporate sponsor of campus computing, but that was not the vetting factor in terms of getting you here today. We really do want to talk about innovations in technology that benefit the larger issues of school and campus security. So I want to frame this a little bit, and that is that the security issues have changed dramatically in both schools and colleges. We think about, my work is primarily higher ed. The world changed dramatically in terms of the day at Virginia Tech. And you saw campuses that might have had PA systems all of a sudden going to notification systems. There were notifications in K-12 that were originally done for snow days and ADA. How many we got to get our kids back, as opposed to the threat of violence or other kinds of stuff. We're now going to the next level. At the risk of perhaps helping you with the story, Social Sentinel has a great story. I mean, this is the story of a campus security officer taking technology and going to the next level as an entrepreneur. Is that a fair encapsulation?
It is, and actually half of us were also at a mass notification service at the time of Virginia Tech. So we have been part of that evolution. We've seen that evolution. And our CEO, Dr. Gary Margolis, did come from campus safety. He was a former police chief, and he saw that his team members way back in the day were trying to analyze social media as part of their operations on a day-to-day basis. And as you can imagine, that is a daunting thing back then, let alone today when hundreds of millions of posts are being created and posted daily. So he took a look at what his team was doing and what other teams were doing across the country with respect to understanding the digital conversation, and realized that there were really two divergent paths. One, people safety and security teams who were trying to do it themselves, and those who were trying to kind of force social media monitoring services to work for them. And he said, wait a second, that's not in their jurisdiction. Monitoring something really takes them out of what it is that they should be doing. Let's instead figure out how to harness the digital conversation and bring threat alerts to those people who are responsible for public safety. And from there, Social Sentinel was born.
Okay. You work with schools, you work with colleges, you also work with communities.
We work with communities, yes.
All right, so the monitoring of social media, Twitter, Instagram, let's sort of put names and faces, sort of names and titles and companies on this in terms of the activities of students, whether they're 7, 17, or 57, and what that really means.
It's a multi-layered question. There are obviously different social media sources. We deal only with public social media, so we don't go into private social media for obvious reasons. Different types of content and threats are posted on different types of services. So you might have an Instagram where you're likely to see a broad-based type of threat, or even whether it's against local infrastructure or people. And then you have something else on the other side, for instance, with long-form social media like Tumblr, where people delve more deeply into self-harm and suicide and depression issues. So what we have to do systemically is figure out how to map the right kind of topics and keywords and hashtags and behavioral phrases to the right type of social media content, and then bring those in the form of threat alerts to our user base as the need arises.
Before we go a little further, there's a huge privacy issue here. Particularly in K-12.
Absolutely.
One side of this is social bullying. One side may be the case of students who are depressed, other kinds of issues. Law would state that you can't, that is protected space. You need parental approval in terms of some of the stuff that they do on social media, whether they have parental approval or not. A little different in terms of college campuses and public communities. But the privacy issues are daunting.
The privacy issues are daunting, and again, it's one of the main reasons that we wanted to look at social media threat alerts versus monitoring. You shouldn't be fishing for content.
All right, so I want to push you. I want to clarify the nuance there between monitoring and alerts and what this continuum looks like if I'm a civilian.
Absolutely. So if you are monitoring something, the social media services tend to allow you to like draw a geofence and look at everything that's happening within the lens of that geofence,
Right.
or to enter in keywords and just sort of receive an entire history of information posted about that across the globe.
Yeah.
What we do and what others in the threat alert industry do is we use methods to be able to identify threats that are very specific to a particular client, so that they're not drawing a geofence and looking at every post about coffee or what have you. They're only receiving something that they have jurisdiction over. And this is important because, if you look at a school, you might think, okay, great, well, I'll just draw a geofence around a school, and then I'll monitor everything that's going on in there. Okay, well, you don't.
This looks like it's very NSA, National Security Agency.
Yeah, and you don't want to.
Right.
You should not be having, as a K-12 administrator, having access to all the private thoughts of your students who are on that campus. And let's not forget that a threat is likely to come from outside the campus, and even outside the campus community, especially in the higher ed space. So let's take a look at what we need to do to deliver localized threat information. For us as a company, we've decided to build a very large database of safety and security terms, behavioral phrases, things of that nature that will help surface those kinds of issues. And then we layer that onto something that we call Local Plus, which allows our clients to go in and say, this is an issue that is relevant to my community. This is infrastructure that is relevant to my community. These are people who are high targets in my community, especially in the higher ed space, as you're well aware.
So, look, example, about a year and a half ago, I had a conversation as part of a public interview with the college president. He was talking about what happened at his university after a football game and a major loss that led to a lot of vandalism and other kinds of stuff. He said, in fact, that a lot of this was gathering on social media. These are the kinds of things you're talking about.
Absolutely. And a lot of times when they have information in advance of an event occurring, even if it's unfolding in real time, by having enough time to allocate their resources to a different part of, for instance, the stadium or outside the stadium, they can deter those things from happening. We've even had issues where they were able to kind of go online and put the pieces together and say, look, all we need to do is bring in a water truck, bring in extra people over to the left quad, and put some people up on the roof. That will be enough of a deterrent that we aren't going to have an issue. And sure enough, they haven't, even though there was momentum building toward that on social media. Sounds funny, but you can actually do a lot.
On the other hand, every student is walking around with a video camera these days.
They are.
In terms of seeing that response. If there's a response to what the signals coming off from the social media, the other part of that is also every student's walking around when that water truck is coming down the street to that quadrant. Does that escalate? Does that settle? How does that begin to play out?
I think that it helps bring reason. So, we've seen a number of events tend to be a pretty big issue here because you do have a crowd mentality, and what you didn't have before this was access to information on where the crowd is kind of going, whether that be physically or mentally,
and potentially the intentionality.
Exactly. And so when they have that additional piece of information, they can make better operational decisions on how they want to handle it. They're trained professionals. They know what they need to do. They just need access to the information in order to be able to help make smart decisions and bring the crowd back to kind of normalcy.
What about K-12? I know that big concern, understandably, about cyberbullying, not just in higher ed, but also K-12. There's the issue of Yik Yak as a social media platform, which a lot of students at all ages like, but also is well documented in terms of hateful speech, to put a term on it, both again in K-12 and higher ed, and also bullying. Again, where does this sort of reside in the landscape of this conversation about monitoring?
It's interesting. Bullying is a pretty subjective issue, and there are a lot of laws in some states requiring K-12 to monitor for that and take steps, and in other cases specifically not allowing them to do that. So it varies by community. But what we see is having access to information about your overall climate helps you make better decisions about the programs that you have in place, the dialogue that you might need to have with students, the dialogue you might need to have with parents. Right. And what we're finding with our clients is, especially those who choose to be transparent about their use of a social media threat alert system, it gives them an opportunity to bring to their parental and student community not just a conversation about digital citizenship, but also about the very real repercussions associated with false threats that are shared on sites like Yik Yak. It helps them understand that there is something more that's going on beyond the scope of maybe you thought it was funny or you didn't want to go to school that day. So as much as, and I think this having kind of watched safety and security over the last decade, is as much as we can be here to offer tools and services to help, we also know that it's critical for people to start to become educated and to educate their population. And our K-12 clients are doing a fantastic job of really reassessing their safety and security climate after understanding a little bit better the digital conversation that's happening about it.
So it seems to me the technology, not to make light, the technology is the easy part. It's essentially the training that goes with it in terms of understanding what the technology does, the link between the folks who are doing the technology, doing the monitor, and the next level of decision making and understanding with school and campus officials.
And one of the things that we are doing kind of on the forefront is also, and it speaks to our CEO, Dr. Margolis's area of expertise, but is sitting down with our clients as part of the onboarding process, working with them about their operational procedures, how they tie into their policies and practices, and what kind of communication they need to have out with their community in order to be able to have an effective program. You can't just silo this and say, okay, well now I'm, just like video cameras, I'm monitoring social media. It's not about that. These are threats.
I think many of us begin to envision this. It's that scene from the movie of somebody sitting in a huge control panel that looks like approximately what we think maybe the National Security Agency, and all this stuff is there. It's sort of visualized in some place of conversations that are floating across the screen, and then ultimately who's the person that makes the decision about activating a response for that.
Yeah, and it varies by client and especially by vertical. So it's a little bit different in the higher ed space than it is in K-12. But no, they even higher ed institutions really don't have the resources to have somebody sitting in front of a computer and looking at a stream of social media posts, which is why threat alerts are so critical. That distinction is both operational as well as jurisdictional, right? So they need to protect what they have jurisdiction over, but they also need to be mindful of their resources. So we have clients in K-12 who they receive alerts. They might come throughout the day. They sit down in the morning. They sit down in the afternoon. And what I love about those clients is they look holistically. They're like, okay, what's really happening? Yes, we're seeing this kind of an alert pop up, but let's talk about it in context of what we have going on. So they're having an ongoing dialogue. And then, in higher ed, you might have one part of the institution, for instance, in campus safety, who's using the service in one way. The threat assessment team could be using it in an entirely different way. They're looking at different filters, different terms, and then segregated entirely from both of those is counseling services. They obviously have access to information that is completely protected from the threat assessment and the campus security team, as it should be. So we have to treat each one of those as different opportunities for them to engage with their communities based upon their discipline.
I think that's a really interesting typology that you put it into these three different categories. It's not exclusively the potential for a heavy-handed security response. It's monitoring a variety of different contexts, and it's sensitive to the unique context of that organization, of that institution.
For sure. And each institution has a different approach to how they manage threat assessment as well as just ongoing safety and security climate. And this is an aspect of that. So it's going to fit within their culture in a different manner from one versus another. And a lot of, frankly, our higher ed institutions even bring in the student body leaders. They want them to be aware of what they're doing, what they're not doing. They want them to participate in what type of operating procedures they're going to have in place, and understand the nature and scope of what they're doing and what they're not doing. So it's a kind of a holistic campus approach. It's part of their community.
I was intrigued by your comment about digital citizenship as well, as part of an extended part of user education, not just for the people who are monitoring, but for a larger part of the community.
Absolutely.
Natasha, thank you very much for joining us for this conversation about security issues.
Thank you.
Much appreciate you coming in for the conversation. All right, and we're going to take again another short break. Next up, our final conversation today will be with Alan Arkatoff, who's the Katzman Ernst Chair for Educational Entrepreneurship, Technology, and Innovation at the University of Southern California.